Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 1912 podcast. I'm your host, Kane. My guest today is actually a fantastic one. His name is Merrick Rosenberg. So Merrick is the CEO of Take Flight Learning. He co-founded Team Builders Plus in 1991 and Take Flight Learning in 2012. He is the author of the award-winning book, The Chameleon, and his latest book, Personality Wins, Who Will Take the White House and How We Know. Merrick is a personality expert who has worked with more than 100,000 people at more than half of the Fortune 500 companies in the US and around the world. Under his leadership as CEO of Take Flight Learning, his company has been selected as the New Jersey Business of the Year and named one of the fastest growing companies and best places to work in Philadelphia area. Merrick has received his MBA from Drexel University, who recognized him as the Alumni Entrepreneur of the Year. He has a BA in Political Communications from George Washington University as well. Merrick, thank you so much for coming on. It's amazing to have you here. So before we begin, I want to talk about your background, the four birds. Now, I know that's part of your personality, the Personality Wins book. So can you get more into that?
Sure. Well, I've been teaching personality since 1994, but I was using letters and people didn't remember it. And I wanted to create something that was stickier, that people could look at and say, okay, I got it. And I say the birds flew into my world. And from that moment on, it's just been so much easier to teach people about themselves and how they interact with others. And I can walk you through. Should we give a quick overview of the four birds?
Oh, I would love to learn about them.
So when you think of someone who is an eagle, picture the eagle personality. What comes to mind to you? Like if somebody had the traits of an eagle, what do you think they would be like?
Someone who is, someone who's a leader, someone who's very commanding, who's imposing, who has a certain vibrance to their presence and personality. That's what I
Yeah,
would picture an eagle
exactly.
as.
Right. You got it. They're confident, they're assertive, direct, take charge. And the beauty of that is I didn't have to teach you what the eagle is. It's already intuitive. So if it's intuitive today, it'll be intuitive 5 years from now. How about the next one? We got this parrot over my shoulder here. When you think of a parrot, what comes to mind?
I don't know. Actually, for me, a parrot is more of a bird who likes to, how should I say, who's very intelligent, who's very smart, who learns very quickly and can repeat what they learn.
Yeah, and part of that is that they're very much storytellers. That you hear them talking a lot. They're fun. They're charismatic. They've got a lot of energy. I was in California a couple months back, and I was at a place where there was a whole series of palm trees, and they were filled with these bright green parrots, and you couldn't even hear yourself talk. It was so loud. And that's the parrot. They're talkative, they're energetic. When they're there, you know they're there. Versus the dove, doves are, what do you think, when you think of the dove, what comes to mind?
Calm, composed, very, what's the word what's the word I'm looking for? Someone who's very, how should I say, very, very quiet, but
Yeah, very reserved.
very reserved. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and they're very compassionate, caring. They just want people to get along. They're very giving and peaceful. How about the last one, which is the
The
owl?
owl. Okay, so the owl is let me think about this one. For the owl, I would say is I would also put the owl as reserved for some reason. It sounds like a bird who is reserved, who stands back in the shadows and waits for something to happen. I could be wrong. I don't
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Yeah, they are. They're everything they do is behind the scenes. Like the parrot, they want the spotlight, but the owl is very thoughtful, very observant, very analytical. If they're going to do something, it's going to be done properly. They have a system and a plan. So you can see these four birds are very different. Uh, Nobody's just one of them or a combination of all four, but there's probably one or two which are like home base for you.
Right. And so, as far as your book is concerned, Personality Wins. You focus on essentially politics in this book, and you compare the personalities as far as the birds are concerned to the politicians. So, in your opinion, like with the two politicians today, especially in the upcoming election, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, which personality would you say they would fit into?
So you've got Donald Trump, clearly not the dove. He is definitely not the dove. He's really the eagle style, and it's not just the eagle. It's like the eagle dialed up. Like just keep crank that dial a few times, and he's got super strong eagle, which means that that directness can sometimes become blunt, or the assertiveness can sometimes become aggressive if you overuse your style, and he does. He's got people either love him or hate him because it's his personality. He has a big personality, and uh, he generates a big following at his rallies. But he also can frustrate some people because he's a little too direct and a little too blunt, and sometimes that can become insensitive.
Can I guess what Joe Biden is? Is Joe Biden the owl? Am I right in saying that?
No, he doesn't have a lot of owls. Although he surrounds himself with owls, I think, to make sure that they do things. But he throughout his career, Biden has always been more of a parrot. He's always had a lot of big energy, a big smile. He has a big laugh, and he also, when he speaks, he thinks so fast that sometimes he'll make these verbal gaffes, these mistakes, because he'll say things, and then it's like almost like he there's a thin filter between speaking and thinking, and he speaks too quickly. And so sometimes he says things, and it's like, oh no, did I say that out loud? And gets himself in trouble. But lately, I think he's been displaying a lot more of his secondary style, which is more of the dove. In fact, in the Democratic convention, he was very much focused on empathy and compassion and caring. And he talked about the soul of the nation, the heart of the nation, which are it's the dove language. That's the language that the dove speaks. So very interesting because we've got the eagle in Donald Trump going against a parrot dove who's really focusing on displaying more of that dove energy at this time.
How do you determine these personalities of these presidential candidates?
Well, you know, you'd think it's hard to do because you'd think, well, how do you figure out a personality of somebody who you've never met? And for some of these presidents who were from throughout history, they're long gone. There's no video of them. But if you think about somebody's personality, you think about somebody like a Robin Williams. Picture that comedian, big energy. Like if you looked at him, you'd probably guess, well, that's a parrot. Or someone like a Bill Gates, which is very analytical. You almost can look at him and say, that's kind of an owl style. Or Arnold Schwarzenegger, this big action star. You can feel that eagle energy. Or a Mother Teresa. You can feel that she's the dove. And that's the thing is that you can almost look at them and be like, I got it. When I wrote Personality Wins, I didn't do that in 5 seconds. It wasn't a snap judgment. The beautiful thing about presidents is that people write books about them. People who have worked with the president, people who are friends with the president, uh, presidential scholars have written books. So there's so much that's written about them and their personality. Plus, you get to watch them, at least from the 1950s or so on. You can really watch them and see what they look like on TV and see how they moved and see how they spoke. And all of that just paints the picture.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like what you see on TV is, of course, their public personas. Is it possible that they can have a different personality type in private versus in public, or is it all just meshed together?
Yeah, it is definitely possible. And in fact, I talked a lot about that. There were a few presidential candidates in the United States, and it was interesting. They all seemed to have the owl style. There were people, Mitt Romney and Bob Dole and uh, Al Gore, that they all seemed to have this very stiff, almost when they waved at people, like it was very stiff. But yet people talked about them behind the scenes. It's just very loose and relaxed and having fun and very funny and personable. So sometimes what we see in public isn't necessarily what they're really like in private.
Right. Yeah, that's always got to me because whatever you see in presidential elections, really when they're debating on stage and stuff, it really comes. It doesn't really seem like they are all that genuine up there. So I'm wondering, from a voter's perspective, do voters really consider people's personalities when they vote, or is it just or is it just what the outcomes of the potential election can be?
We might think that it's really based on policy and platform and what they say they're going to do once they're in office. But the reality is, personality wins elections, and it's done so for a long time. If you go back and you start looking at presidential elections and work your way back in time, eagles and parrots, they have a big personality. Eagles and parrots have beaten doves and owls in every US presidential election, going all the way back to 1932. The 22 straight elections, the only time the doves and owls win is if they're going against another dove or owl. And I'll give you an example. You go back to someone like Jimmy Carter. Now, whether people liked him or didn't like him, people would say, look, he was a nice guy. He was a caring, compassionate, nice guy. I mean, after he's out of office, he's building homes in his late 90s, uh, and helping the poor, and making sure elections are fair around the world, and helping to cure diseases around the world, and raising money and awareness. He's a nice guy, and he's the dove. And he won, but he won against Ford, who was also a dove. And then in the next election, he goes against Reagan. Now, Reagan's personality was a big parrot, big smile, big energy, big charisma, and he got crushed and Carter got crushed by Reagan. And that's exactly what happened, and it's happened over and over. Is that we might think that authenticity and genuineness and compassion are really what people care about, and they are in our personal relationships. But in presidential elections, not so much. In fact, character isn't even that important to people. In the US, we've elected presidents. Richard Nixon's name before he was elected was Tricky Dick. Bill Clinton was Slick Willie. And we still voted for them. It didn't matter. It's almost like in personal relationships, we say, if I were to say to you, okay, I've got someone for you. Now, we've been measuring what they say, and they tell the truth 80% of the time. 20% absolute total lies, total fiction, but they're honest 80% of the time. Would you want to marry that person? Probably not. But in presidential elections, we're like 80%. Hey, we'll take it. That seems pretty good for a politician. So it's almost like in our personal relationships, authenticity and honesty and character matter. But to lead a country, sadly, it doesn't matter to us as much.
Yeah, I don't fully understand that because really, if I would want someone to run a country, I would want the person to be wanting the good for all in the country itself. So I'll give you an example. So someone like Bernie Sanders, I quite like the guy. I may not agree with all of his policies, but he seems to be genuinely someone who cares for the country, who cares for the United States and for the people in it. So regardless of of what his policies are, it seems like whatever he wants to do seems to be for the good of the United States. So for someone like me, I don't know that it would seem like he would be the ideal person, but
Yeah.
clearly he's not there anymore.
Well, look, you look at somebody like Bernie Sanders. He has a very strong eagle, but he also has it softened by that dove style.
Hmm.
So he has that part of him where there were times you would see tears in his eyes, and 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 it's that extra little authenticity, that compassion that you feel from him that makes you say, maybe I don't agree with everything, but I like him. And you looked at somebody like earlier in the election, like a Pete Buttigieg. He's the dove. Whether people liked his policies or not, it's hard to dislike him. He's just a nice guy. I mean, when Hillary Clinton picked Tim Kaine, who was the dove, to be her VP candidate, people, everybody on both sides, he was a dove. They literally were saying, he's a nice guy. We really like the guy. And that's the thing about doves, is that they're really liked, but they don't have that energy and charisma, which is what seems to be what people are voting for. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying it's a thing that people are voting for, that big energy over the smaller energy.
Why do you think that's the case, though?
I don't think it's always been the case. In fact, if you go back prior to 1932, overwhelmingly, owls and doves won the presidency. And they won the presidency beating parrots and eagles. The first 5 presidents were owls. The 6 presidents leading up to the Civil War were doves. Because if you think about, where did we learn about their beliefs and what they wanted to do and accomplish? We learned about them in the newspaper. That was the media. And in the newspaper, in the written media, owls and doves sounded logical and compassionate, and that they cared and they could explain their perspectives. But all of a sudden, here comes radio in the early 1900s, and FDR's big booming voice gets out there. And then you see JFK versus his parrot versus Nixon's owl. And then you see in social media, somebody could just tweet out of 280 characters. Owls can't do that, because owls, they need a lot more information, that they have a lot more information they want to explain. So TV and radio and social media benefit eagles and parrots. They don't benefit the doves and owls, and that's who people are voting for. It's the people who have big ideas. We'll figure the details out later.
So okay. So now that we've got that all in place, you said Donald Trump has an eagle personality, but Joe Biden used to be more of a parrot who's transitioning towards a dove. But you also said that then in the recent years, eagles and parrots would have won elections as compared to doves and owls. So does that mean that Donald Trump is our potential winner in this election?
Well, it's a questionable strategy if you look at it from a personality perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
Accentuating the dove when doves don't beat eagles. But I think what he's banking on is the empathy gap. He's looking at Donald Trump and saying, look, here's a guy, he doesn't convey a lot of empathy. And people are saying, the people who watch that and are offended by him say, we need someone who does. We need someone who cares about the people. And so what's happening is you get that perspective. The entire Democratic convention was focused on empathy and compassion. And so I think what we're seeing here is, if this were any, quote, normal year, this would not be a good strategy. Going at it from a dove perspective to beat an eagle, not happening. But given that Donald Trump overuses his strengths so much, what happens is, when you overuse your strengths become your weakness. It's like your greatest asset becomes your greatest liability. What got Donald Trump elected was his personality. However, because he overuses it so much, assertiveness becomes aggressive. Straight talk, being direct, becomes blunt and insensitive. Confidence becomes arrogance or even narcissism. And so what we see is, when you overuse your personality, it turns people off. And because he's doing that, it really may give that advantage to Joe Biden, because he's overusing his personality. And for the first time, breaks the streak of 22 times in a row where the eagles and parrots beat the doves and owls. But Donald Trump breaks every model, so why not this one?
Yeah, he's a bit of an outlier. He's always been a bit of an outlier, But as far as Biden is concerned, so he's had a number of gaffes in the past few months, and I would say in the past year, actually. People are saying that he's got some form of dementia and all of that, So do you think that those gaffes actually hurt him in the election, or could potentially hurt him in the election?
The thing about Biden is that he's had verbal gaffes his entire career. This is not new. This is not something that just has emerged as he's gotten older. You can go back in time and just Google gaffes by Joe Biden, and you'll see a big list of them, and some of them are doozies. I mean, some of them are not good. And I think what happens for Biden is that when he gets into parrot mode and he gets all excited, he gets ahead of himself and he makes mistakes and he says things that he just shouldn't say. And I think his staff is saying to him, let's dial it down, focus on emotion and compassion and empathy and caring. And when he's in that mode, he doesn't make mistakes. And so I may he have lost a step over the years, perhaps, but the reality is he's made verbal gaffes his entire career. This is not a new phenomenon for him. And I think his campaign team is giving him good advice and saying, dial it back, slow it down. Don't speak too quickly, because when you do, you make mistakes.
What about the voters who've got like who are the extremists on both sides essentially? Do you think that these people's personality can potentially sway the voters accordingly based on extremes?
Yeah, I think that there's if you were to break up the electorate into thirds, you've got a third of the people who are always going to vote for whoever the Democratic candidate is. You've got a third of the electorate who's always going to vote for that Republican candidate. But there's that third in the middle. And those swing voters, those are the ones who are tuning into the person that they like. And you've heard it even throughout the election with somebody like an Elizabeth Warren, people saying, I don't know what it is. I'm not sure. I just don't like her. I heard a lot of people say that. They may have completely agreed with her platform and what she wanted to do, but they didn't like her. And the same thing happened with Hillary. And it's happened with a lot of owls because they don't necessarily exude likability like a parrot or a dove will exude. And so I think that what we're really looking at is, yes, without a doubt, there's probably 2/3 of the voting public who the personality isn't going to matter. However, they're not the people who make the difference. As long as they show up and there's voter turnout, that those swing voters are going to make the difference. And presidential candidates know it. Look where they're spending their ad dollars. They're spending their money in a half a dozen states because that's what's going to make the difference. And in those states, the voters who are those swing voters are going to vote for who they like, not necessarily who has the policy that aligns with what they want.
What I also want to get into is basically Trump and Hillary. So you mentioned Trump, you mentioned Hillary as well before. So both of them are extremely polarizing figures essentially. Why do you think that was the case?
So let's take that apart. What you've got is you've got Donald Trump, who's the eagle, and he lives in eagle mode. He very rarely ever strays out of being an eagle. You have Hillary Clinton, owl, very rarely strays from being an owl. She shared tons of statistics and data and plans and exactly what she's going to do, and she was always very prepared. And here's the problem with that. When you only exude one style, you don't have broad appeal. Take someone like Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, he would at times in one speech, in 10 minutes, he hits all four styles. And that's what makes him such a master communicator. Bill Clinton, he has those moments where he's in eagle mode and he looks right in that camera and he gets intense. He has times where he throws his head back in this big chuckle laugh. When he's in dove mode, he puts his hand on his heart and he tilts his head and his Arkansas accent comes out and it softens. And when he's in owl mode, he shares tons of data. Well, guess who you appeal to when you display all four styles? You appeal to everyone. And he generated a movement. A tremendous amount of Republicans voted for him that never voted Democrat before. Reagan did the same thing. He had moments where he was standing at the wall in Berlin and he's like, tear down this wall. And that's eagle mode. He was very funny. He was always making jokes. He had just gotten shot. He's being wheeled into an operating room and he's still making jokes. He's saying, boy, I hope you're a Republican, to the doctor. I mean, he's joking. He was just shot and he's still being funny. When the space shuttle, when the Challenger exploded, he gave a beautiful, just a heart, speech that just came from his heart. And he was in dove mode, and he shared a ton of data and statistics as well. And he appealed to everyone. Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan, two different parties, they were what I called a chameleon. They could display any behavior. And when you can display all four styles, you appeal to everyone. When you get stuck in one style, which is what happened in 2016 with both candidates, it becomes polarizing, that they're not incredibly liked. And when you're not well liked, that tends to create some animosity, and it's their lack of flexibility, which is what created their issues.
I wonder, where do these personality types come from, really? There must be some sort of underlying motivations that people exuberate to essentially to portray these personalities. Would you happen to know anything about that? The motivations, the underlying motivations, essentially, which
Sure.
foster the personality.
Yeah, if you go back to each style, they each have these kind of driving beliefs. You look at a dove, for example, and you picture someone like a Mother Teresa or Princess Diana or Mr. Rogers. They were on a mission, and it's almost as if their self-esteem, their self-worth comes from a place of service to others. Like if I'm not being kind and helping others, then I, what would people think of me? They'd see me as a selfish human being, and so they're driven to help. You have someone like the owl who they everything has to be accurate and precise and done properly, and there's a plan and a system and a model, and for them, if they equate the quality of their work with the quality of who they are as a human being. So if I do something and it's not right, then they fear being judged for what they have done. Whereas if a parrot does something and it's not right, they're like, what are you going to do? Close enough. If an owl does something and it's not right, they feel like you're going to judge them for who they are as a person. So they seek to provide data and have a system and a process. Elizabeth Warren was selling shirts that said, Warren has a plan for that. Well, welcome to the world of the owl. Of course she has a plan. She's an owl. She has lots of plans. For the parrots, they just feel like if I'm not exuding positive energy and bringing that positive outlook, then people are going to think I'm a negative person, or I'm a down person, or I'm not somebody they're going to want to be with. So I'm going to bring the fun. I'm going to bring the charisma. For an eagle, their behaviors flow from this place of, if I'm not accomplishing something big, then people won't respect me. So for the eagle, they want to achieve. They want to accomplish something. So you can see all four. Eagles have this driving need to achieve things. Parrots exude positive energy. Doves help others. Owls are about accuracy and precision. And those inner beliefs are driving the outer behaviors.
So with these inner beliefs and inner motivations, really, is it possible, like, so for someone who's just a kid, really, is it possible to predict really where their personality types would head, or is it such that we're all on a one single track?
When they're even a small child, I had a nephew. I have a nephew, and he was 6 months old. He's like 6 years old now. Now he's in kindergarten, and when he was like 6 months old, I looked at him and I was like, that kid is an eagle. He was in charge. Now my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, one's an owl dove, one is a dove owl. And I remember I turned to my wife at one point. He must have been not even a year old. And I looked at him and I said, his name's Evan. And I said, one day, Evan will rule this land. And so my wife remembered. I didn't even remember I said that. And then one day we're sitting at Thanksgiving, the whole family's all together. And this is their first Thanksgiving at their house that they are hosting. Who is sitting at the head table at like age 4? You guessed it. He's like in charge of the whole family. And my wife turns to my sister-in-law and says, you're going to let him sit at the head of the table? You're going to, and my sister-in-law looks at my wife and just said, you don't understand. You just don't understand. And my wife turns to me and she goes, Evan, is ruling this land. And he's like 4 years old. So even as small children, you can see it. You have your parrot child who's just laughing all the time and just playful. You have your dove child who's very sensitive. If you raise your voice, they burst into tears. You have your owl child, and everything has to be just perfect. The blanket has to be lined up properly, and things are on their plate just so. They have very specific foods they will eat and not eat. Your eagle thinks they're in charge, even though they're 4 years old. And who are you to tell them what to do? And so, even as small children, we see these personality traits play out in the people around us. It's fun to watch.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that you can sort of divide people into these personality types, and you can sort of predict where exactly they plan on they might be in the future. Really, what I'm wondering is that I assume that life experiences, things that go on in life, do play a part in some way, shape, or form in their personality development as well. So my question to you is, do you think that these personalities can shift and change over time as people grow up and experience more of life?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Here, I'll show you these are my. I use these when I do training in companies. These are called my desktop birds. So I'll give you an example. You've got somebody who's an owl. They just graduated from college. They're an owl, secondary eagle. They've become an accountant. Now, day one, they're an owl. They're in the weeds. They're in the data and receipts, and there's so much statistics and data that they're keeping track of. But now we fast forward 25 years into the future, and this person is now the chief financial officer in a 250 person company. Are they in the weeds at this point and receipts? No, because over their career, now they're looking at budgets and finance and cash flow and investments. And maybe now they're more big picture, not caught up in the details. And throughout their life, their personality has shifted gradually, and now they're more of an eagle secondary owl. It's unlikely as an accountant that you're the parrot. That does not happen very often. But you can absolutely see your style shift and change based on your life's experiences, the role that you play, the culture that you're in. And absolutely, your style can change over time.
And for someone, so say, I know a lot of actors and actresses who, while they may be fantastic, so someone like Jim Carrey, he's a very vibrant and outgoing individual, or that's what he appears to be on screen. But in actuality, he seems to have lead a fairly reserved life, and doesn't really get out into the spotlight much. So that being said, is it possible to have like a blend of both working simultaneously with each other?
Yeah, you can have multiple styles. I mean, he's a great example. He displays that parrot in the outer world, but in his private life, I actually think he's maybe even more of an owl. I've seen him interviewed and just how he talks, and he just is like, I don't need to be around a lot of people. He dials that parrot up, and when he does, it's like off the scale in his movies. But in his private life, he's maybe more of an owl. And the owl parrot is perhaps the most creative of all the styles. I always call them the idea factories. You picture someone like Thomas Edison or Ben Franklin or Da Vinci. These are some of the most innovative people in history. You take someone like Thomas Edison, well, obviously very meticulous, detailed, specific data analyzing, but he was also the Wizard of Menlo Park. He was a PR showman, and he really devastated Nikolai Tesla's work by just being better at public relations. He had that parrot, and Tesla was more of the dove who just said, "I want to share everything I have with the world." And some people he had that one dove style, but going against the parrot and the owl combination, which is what Edison had. It's very creative, but it's a combo style, and it's a very interesting one because it's a very creative style.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. But I want to get into you as well. Like, what was your motivation for doing this and for writing this book? Clearly, you've put a lot of thought and energy into it.
Well, I've worked with the personality styles for many years. So for me, I work with a lot of CEOs. I work in companies and teach people how to use their personality to drive their success and to create a happy life. When you are living within your personality and you're using the power of your style, that's how you not only create a life that you're enjoying, but also it's successful. You're meeting your goals. And I wrote this because I wanted to see. I was curious. First of all, did do personality, does it make a difference in presidential elections? And as I started to study it and go back, I realized, wow, it's not just a small component; it's a major component. And I wanted to share with people uh, maybe a cautionary tale of are you voting for people who are in your best interest, or are you tuning into their personality, and is that a good thing? And I also wanted people to see themselves in the story. So as they read through Personality Wins, I wanted them to see themselves in the presidential candidates and the presidents, and they could say to themselves, "I would never have done that, but that's exactly how I would have handled the situation," because you see your personality reflected in the presidents, and you learn about yourself along the way.
Another question I wanted to ask you was, what is the biggest takeaway from the book that someone can expect?
Uh, on a personal level, there's something which I call the big assumption, which
Hmm.
is the idea that we assume that if I like something, other people are going to like it too. And I describe it as, if it's important to me, it's important to you. So in the presidential candidate world, I talk about how Dove candidates, what's important to them? Values. And they talk about values. If you watched Pete Buttigieg, that's all he kept talking about was his values. If you watch Joe Biden talk about the soul of the nation and our values as Americans, like that, he's really putting that Dove energy out there. And so, if you looked at Hillary Clinton in the last election, what was important to her? Plans and details and statistics. So she shared a lot of them. If you're Donald Trump, what's important to you? Big picture ideas. We'll figure the details out later. So what does he share? Big picture ideas without a lot of detail. And you can just go through all the styles and really see that we are imposing our style on others. We believe that if it's important to me, it'll be important to you. And what we have to really do is recognize that just because something's important to me doesn't mean it's important to you. That Hillary needed to realize, just because all the details of the plans were important to me, they're not necessarily going to motivate voters to vote for her. And so, and this plays out in our personal lives too. If you're a parrot, I'm a parrot. I'm a parrot secondary eagle. My wife is an owl with a secondary dove. Uh, if she asks me directions to get someplace and I go, "Oh, it's just down the street. You'll see it. No big deal." She'll look at me like, owl. And I'll be like, "Okay, you're going to go 2 miles. Then you're going to see a school. Then you're going to see a White House. Then you'll see." And so what we have to realize is that we need to think about who we're talking to, and don't just assume that they want what you want, but rather treat them the way they need to be treated, not the way you need to be treated.
That's very fascinating. You know, when you said that your wife is more like an owl and you're more like a parrot. So, are there particular personality types that do well with each other?
There are. Well, I won't say if they necessarily do well, but what I will say is that opposites attract. And the data says this is true. There was a study by the University of Iowa said 86% of people are drawn to their personality opposite, meaning eagles and parrots tend to be married most often. And I'm sorry, eagles and doves. I said that wrong. Eagles and doves tend to be married most often. Parrots and owls tend to be married most often. Now, I didn't say happily married, just happen to be married. That will take much longer
That's a
than
big
one episode
asterisk.
adding. Yes, but it is true. Parrots and owls, they complement each other. Doves and eagle, it's like they're two sides of the same coin. And I see it all the time when I speak at conferences. I often ask that question. I'll say, okay, uh, let's have a little, a impromptu poll. Raise your hand if you think you're married, to someone who's your opposite. If you're an owl, you're married to a parrot, and vice versa. And if you're an eagle, married to a dove, and dove married to an eagle. And I will tell you, I look out at the audience. It's a sea of hands going up. Overwhelmingly, at least 3/4 of the hands go up in the room. And so it's fascinating. You can just anecdotally, even without a formalized study, I can tell you people say it to me all the time that they're married to someone who's opposite.
I wonder why that's the case, though, because I mean, if you would have to think about it from a very layman's perspective, it would seem that you would want someone who shares the same sort of likes and dislikes as you, really, not someone who's the opposite of you.
Well, remember though, they may share the same hobbies and interests and have similar values. But from a personality perspective, if you had two parrots, you ever go on a road trip and have two parrots in the car? And
Ooh.
fighting for airspace. They're talking over each other. No one's listening. Parrots like the fact that they have someone who's an owl who's just gonna, they can talk and the owl is gonna listen. They complement each other. When you have someone who's the dove, they may not want to be the one to make that big decision. Eagles like making the big decision. So the dove appreciates that the eagle's going to make the call. And they really balance each other out. It's almost like you want to staff your weakness. You do that at work. If I'm a parrot, I make sure I have owls around me to make sure all the details are right. My wife would kill me if I say I staffed my weakness at home, so I will not say that. but we really do balance each other out. You know, as a parent, look, I have an MBA. I took finance classes in finance. She's a therapist. Okay, she's got a master's degree in counseling. Who do you think handles our checkbook? Not me. I'm a parrot. I took finance, but I did not like it. She's the owl. She handles the checkbook. She's the one who does things like that. But if we go to buy a car, and we have to bargain as a parrot eagle, I'm like, all right, my turn, and I enjoy it. Whereas for her, that's just torturous. So if we respect the differences instead of judge the differences, it creates a great relationship. And I think that's the power. They each bring something different when they're so opposite. But you've got to respect the differences instead of being annoyed that they don't look at things the way you do.
Yeah. I would think that would be the case. I do see the logic behind that, actually, because because me and my fiance, we're totally opposite in everything that we do, and
So
I never,
what do you think your style is?
I would like to say that I'm an eagle, but
Okay.
I think I'm a mixture of the eagle and the owl. Uh,
Okay.
to be honest, like if
And
I were to be completely honest, but the eagle I would put slightly higher than the owl.
so
Uh,
the eagle owl has this thing where they're like, I want it now and I want it right. They have high expectations of themselves and others. Now, what do you think she is? Is she more of a dove parrot?
she's more of a dove.
And there you
Absolutely.
have it. And it works, doesn't it?
Yeah, surprisingly, we've been together for 9 years, and given how different our personalities are, I mean, even coming down to small things like driving. Like I'm a driver who will constantly switch lanes to try and get ahead and get home as soon as possible. In
Welcome to
fact, come to
driving with an eagle. That's the eagle driver.
yeah.
And the dove is saying, relax, it's okay. Take your time. Don't cut them off. That's not nice. Let them in. And you're like,
Absolutely.
out of my way. I've
Absolutely.
seen that interaction before.
Yeah, I never actually thought of it that way, because even on the trip coming over here, she was getting freaked out that I was driving fast, because I said, I need to get home. I need to be home by 6:30 for the podcast. And she was like, well, just relax. We'll be there by 6:15. Don't worry about it. I said, no, what if there's traffic? What is this? And then I was just like zipping through traffic, and she was getting completely completely freaked out by it. But yeah, I can totally see that play out.
And that's the eagle and dove in a relationship. And it works because the eagle makes sure you get there on time and the dove makes sure you're relaxed when you do.
So do you think that for like, let's say if for someone who's looking for a new partner, should they select someone who's the opposite personality type for them? Do you think it should always be the case?
Now, I'm not necessarily saying that opposites are happier than people who have the same styles. I have two friends where I work with one of them. He's an eagle. Okay. And my been friends with him and his wife for many, many years, and she is an eagle. There are two eagles, but and it works fine. Now, when you go in their house, it's louder than my house. They seem to have conversations where they're both trying to talk over each other, but they don't care. And two eagles can fight it out, and then afterwards they're like, "Hey, do you want to go grab a drink?" They don't hold on to it, and so it's fun to watch the two of them. They're very happy. They have a great relationship. Um, you can be the exact same style and have a great relationship. I think it just so happens that that overwhelmingly people tend to be drawn to people who are different. But having said that, you could be the same, and it works. I think the key isn't as much what is the person you're looking for as much as do you accept people for who they are. That if we are judging them because they're different, you're going to be fighting a lot. But if you accept that they see the world differently than I do, and that's okay, then all that conflict melts away, that drama goes away.
Absolutely. I think in any relationship, compromise is key to winning any relationship, because you're never going to find someone who's the exact perfect person you would want them to be. There are always going to be instances where they don't agree with you on certain things, or they just, you argue over something stupid or whatever. But I think, having that meaningful dialogue and compromise between each other, that is key to any relationship to work, regardless of the personality types. That's
I've
just,
always said, yeah, I've always said happy couples know how to fight
yeah. And I,
because
I
they understand how to interact with each other in a respectful way to explore the different perspectives without judging each other and making it personal.
Absolutely. And when I talk to friends who are having issues as a couple, I have friends who actually don't who have partners, and they don't argue with their partners. They don't get into arguments with them or anything like that. And I asked them, I was like, why is that the case? He's like, oh, I don't bother. I don't want to get into it and all. But the way I see it is that it bottles up this emotion, which will ultimately just like spew out one day, and it'll just cause a bigger mess than what would have happened. So you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. I tell people, fight with your argue,
This is
get it off
this
your
is
chest.
this is yeah, but this is conflict advice from an eagle. fight, fight it out, battle it out, and then you're done. The dove says, I'm gonna just let it go. And I don't want to start, I don't want to create negativity, I don't want to argue. To eat the eagle conflict management style is battle it out, and then it's done. We'll go and let's go have some fun. The dove model is I avoid it and I avoid it and I avoid it until one day I explode with 6 months worth of stuff, and then 6 months from now we'll do that again. But they're not gonna. But they don't like conflict, whereas eagle actually doesn't mind conflict at all. So it's interesting to see, like, okay, who are you giving the advice to? If you give that advice to a dove, they may be very resistant. If you give it to another eagle, they'll say, that makes sense.
Yeah, I do see that. I think most of the advice goes to doves from me now that I think about it.
You
But
might want to rethink.
yeah. Yeah, now I'm rethinking what I'm saying. Yeah, but for some reason I feel like when you hash it out with someone and you lay the cards on the table and you say, okay, I don't like this and this about you, and you may not like this and this about me, but if we do X, Y, and Z, maybe we can come to a compromise where that way you're happy and I am happy, but we come to a middle ground, I feel. And I think, to me personally, that's the best way to sort of go about anything, because that way we are open, we're not lying to each other, we're telling the truth about how we feel.
Sure.
So
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that at all. I would just say though that from the dove perspective, that's hard to do. It's hard
mhm.
for them to really address the issues because they don't want to offend anybody. And they have that underlying fear that I'm going to say something that hurts your feelings, or a fear that it's going to make it worse, or that you're going to explode and now I'm going to have to deal with all this heated emotion coming at me. And so doves are much more likely to avoid it uh, and let it go. Although they seem like they're letting it go, but they still hold
I know. I know that. I know that feeling all too well at this point.
on.
Um, well, I want to get back into the political side of things. So, for someone who is to become president, does personality determine how effective they will be as a president?
You might think that there are certain styles that are going to be better as presidents. Perhaps the job tends to reward certain personalities in the sense that these styles thrive, but it's not necessarily true at all. You can look in the business world for as example. Uh, you've got somebody like a Richard Branson, who's the parrot, self-made billionaire. Someone like Bill Gates, who's an owl, self-made billionaire. Uh, Steve Jobs, eagle, obviously self-made billionaire. You have somebody like Howard Schultz from Starbucks, dove, self-made billionaire. All of them very successful, and yet four different styles. Anybody can be a president of a company. Anyone can be a president of the United States or a leader of a country, and any style can be successful. Style, your personality does not determine how successful you'll be, but it does determine how you go about being successful. Those four people I just mentioned grew their businesses in very, very different ways, but all incredibly successfully. And so it's interesting that I think there's a paradigm that eagles are the leader. That's the style that is the style of leadership, and they can be great leaders. But any style can be a great leader. And I've worked with so many CEOs, and I've seen dove CEOs that the people just love. I've seen parrot CEOs that are just absolutely, people revel in the fact that they're the CEO. They create energy, and owl CEOs that people feel like they can trust. So it's anybody can be successful.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I totally agree because when I see Bill Gates as compared to Steve Jobs, both of them are running virtually technology companies which have the same products but have very different management styles.
Oh
You,
yeah, in the same part of the country, in the kind of the Silicon Valley area, they're coming from the same place, in the same world, and yet fundamentally different styles in terms of how they went about growing their business. And Steve Jobs was radical and just he didn't really care what anybody else said. He didn't care what market research said. He's like, this is what we're doing. And Bill Gates was much more methodical and had a process and a system and a plan. And they look what they both did. Look what they've created. They both of them changed the world with what they built.
would it be possible that a personality style can affect how much success or lack thereof a person would have? Really, because I mean, if you take a look at Steve Jobs versus Bill Gates, both of them are extremely successful as is. But if you look at a company like Apple versus Microsoft, one can venture a guess and say, well, Apple is probably more successful than Microsoft being a $1 trillion company and all of that.
No, I mean, not necessarily. I mean, you can look at somebody like a Warren Buffett as an owl, one of the richest men in the world. And also somebody like a Jeff Bezos from Amazon, one of the richest men. And wasn't. I'm not sure if he is anymore after half of his money went away, but I think he's. But look, I mean, very different styles versus a Warren Buffett, very methodical versus a Jeff Bezos. But yet, uh, two of the richest people that have ever walked on this planet. And so style doesn't really, like I said, it doesn't determine how successful you'll be, but it's really all about how you go about creating and building.
Mm-hmm. Do you think personality determines how popular like a president would be?
Now that's an interesting question because if you go back in time, the most, if you look at the top four presidents in terms of just likability and Gallup, not just anecdotal data, but actually look at Gallup approval ratings. look at the people who had the eagle style, like George W. Bush, LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Harry Truman. They had some of the lowest Gallup surveys of any president, and they were all Eagles. Donald Trump has even lower than them, has his Gallup approval ratings are even at the bottom, and they are all Eagles. Eagles win elections, but if you look at the people at the top, you had FDR, so Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Eagle, but also had the parrot. You had JFK, parrot. Ronald Reagan, parrot. Bill Clinton, parrot. And JFK as well. Though you're looking at the people with the highest Gallup approval ratings of any presidents in history, and they were all either parrot eagles or eagle parrots. And yet the Eagles were all towards the bottom of the list. And so absolutely, that extra parrot energy adds the likability to that eagle style.
And what about gender in particular? Does gender play into how people are elected from a personality perspective?
Well, the first thing to say is that gender doesn't necessarily impact personality. There are just as many men who are eagles as women who are eagles. There are just as many men who are doves as women who are doves. And the same is true for parrots and owls. So we may have a stereotype. I think society does, that there are more male eagles and female doves. And it's not true. That is just a stereotype that the data says is absolutely not correct. However, what happens is I think that women who run for president are held to a different standard. You look at somebody like a Hillary Clinton or Elizabeth Warren, and you hear people talk about them is that they're, I mean, even Donald Trump had called Hillary Clinton nasty. But what she was saying, he was being way more aggressive and bullying than she was. But when a woman even becomes remotely assertive, then they are deemed to be somebody who's aggressive. And so I think women have have a harder time because I don't think society allows them to display the same amount of assertiveness as a man does. And I think that's a problem. I don't think that they're treated, that female presidential candidates are treated the same way as male presidential candidates. And I think they have a harder road to travel because of that. I think we've, as a country, have come a long way, I think, throughout history since, say, the 1950s, but we still have a ways to go. And I think that women who are candidates are treated to a different standard than men are.
The way I stand on women versus males as far as personality types are concerned, masculine traits are, the way I see masculine traits are more of the commanding, domineering type of traits, whereas for women in particular, I feel their traits are more of the caring sort of type of personality, someone who is more I wouldn't say family oriented, but it's something like a motherly, something very motherly, from what I see. And
But look at what you're doing, though, right? If you look at that, and that's what I'm saying is that you're associating more of that male energy with the eagle, and that more dove energy with women. And so, and yet there are just as many. Mr. Rogers is a great example of a dove, right? You look at Keanu Reeves, just actor action movies, but it's just like the nicest guy. He's really the dove. Thanks. I think he's got a lot of parrot in there, but I think he also has a lot of dove. And I think that Pete Buttigieg, dove, Jimmy Carter, Eisenhower, a lot of men who are the dove style, and when they are leaders, people like them. I mean, Eisenhower's slogan was "I like Ike." I mean, that's what you get when you have a dove. It's just like he's a nice guy, compare it to LBJ's slogan. You had Goldwater, who had this. He had a slogan, and his slogan was, "In your heart, you know I'm right." Okay, because he was kind of a parrot. He was a fun guy. In your heart, you know I'm right. It's like a gut thing for parrots. But there were some questions about he had seen a therapist, and people were questioning mental health at the time, seeing a therapist wasn't the same. It was more stigmatized back then versus today. And so here you have this parrot who has this slogan, and the slogan is "In your heart, you know I'm right." And you know what LBJ's slogan was? "In your guts, you know he's nuts." Like that's what it is. He's like just attacks his slogan like an eagle, just like swoops in and it just attacks his slogan. And that had kind of a male energy. But if a woman would have used that slogan, they would have said, "Whoa, what are you doing?" So I think that Donald Trump was able to get away with a lot more than Hillary was allowed to get away with. Not that she was trying to get away with something, but I think even her assertive statements were viewed as aggressive.
Right. So the reason why I actually say that is basically based on the kind of jobs which men and women choose in particular. So if you look at jobs which women tend to choose, it would be a lot of women you would see in healthcare, in nursing, customer service, uh, things like that, really, which basically brings out that motherly sort of caring, those traits, really. But for males, a lot of males would choose things like, like engineering, technology, basically things to do, uh, things which they can do, essentially, which
Right.
they can
But
get their
but the
hands on.
question is right. But the question is why? Why is it because women are naturally drawn to them, or
Mm,
is it because that's historically been roles that women have played versus roles that men have played? Because I think
mhm,
remember, there are just as many women who are owls as there are men. And we're starting to see a lot more women entering STEM type of jobs, science and technology and engineering roles. And you see a lot more women now than there were certainly 25 years ago. You see a
mm,
lot more men who are nurses or elementary school teachers than there were even 25 years ago. And that's not very long to see things shifting like this. And so I think what we're starting to see is that we've held these gender stereotypes but when we really look at personality, there's just as many men who are doves who would love to play a role where they can help people.
mm.
Uh, just as many women who are owls who would love to play a role where they can dissect a problem and analyze it and figure out a solution for it. And so I think we're slowly moving to a place where people are able to step into the power of their personality regardless of gender. We obviously have a ways to go, but we're definitely further along than 25 years ago. And that's a pretty short time to have seen the growth that we've seen.
Absolutely. One of the I read this very interesting article on the gender equality paradox in Scandinavia, in the Scandinavian countries in particular. So in the
Okay.
Scandinavian countries, you probably know this already, but like a lot of they push gender equality to the absolute limits. And what they have found was that given all things being equal, or I would say mostly equal, the women in the Scandinavian countries tend to go towards more gender stereotypical roles, and the males tend to go to the more gender stereotypical roles as well, which is why I'm of the belief that this also has somewhat of a biological component to people's nature. So yeah, I completely get what you're saying. uh, when I did this research, it kind of shocked me as well, because I was of the impression too that more women are moving into STEM fields and stuff. And if you do look in countries like in
Sure.
Middle East and in India, and in countries where women were generally repressed in the past, they are going a lot into STEM fields, and more so than men. In fact, there's a 60 in India, I believe it's 60% of women are in STEM fields, and as compared to men. But in a country like in country like Norway or Sweden, again one of the Scandinavian countries, you see them going into more stereotypical roles, even though they have that equality of opportunity. So that leads me to believe that the equality of opportunity, even though it's given, uh, the equality of outcome is slightly different.
Mm. I also think, look, the culture that we're in, how we're raised, has a big impact
Of
on
course.
you perceive my role in society should be. I am happy when I look at and I see that people can enter a role where their personality can really shine, that they don't feel like, well, I can't do that because that's not a job that a male would take, or a woman would take. That when people find jobs that their personality can come through, they will go home every day energized. Uh, if I were as a parrot, if I had to sit in a cubicle every day writing code, just kill me now. I couldn't do it. Whereas if you had an owl, they could be given a problem, put their headphones on, and just lose themselves in it for an entire day without being disturbed. And they figured things out, and they mapped out a plan, and they uncovered something they hadn't seen before. They could be looking at that data all day, and they will go home absolutely energized. And so for me, I always hope that people can find a role where they can be themselves, not what society says they're supposed to be, but something that really allows them to let their personality shine. Because when they do that, they are going to love what they do. When you're trying to be someone you're not, you're going to go home every day exhausted.
Absolutely. My boss is a woman, and I wouldn't cross her twice. She's a pure eagle.
I'm
She's an
sensing she's an
absolute
eagle.
eagle. She's an absolute eagle.
She's not a dove. No one ever says I would not cross my boss when they're a dove.
Yeah, so I completely get it. There are a lot of women out there who are definitely eagles. Like, I've seen them. I mean, you look at some of the UFC fighters. I don't know if you're into UFC and all
Sure.
that, but you look at someone like Ronda Rousey. Oh man,
Right.
like, I wouldn't want to go toe to toe with that woman.
Absolutely.
Absolute,
Yeah.
she's an absolute eagle.
I without a doubt. I mean, what's funny, if you looked at martial arts, I taught martial arts I had my own karate school for 28 years. And so, interestingly, you might think that you get a lot of eagles in the martial arts. Overwhelmingly parrots. I'm sorry, overwhelmingly owls. You hardly
Really?
have any at all, because it's usually something that it's like, I'm working on me. I just get to perfect my form, and it's not like I have to do something with a team of people. I want to do my thing. It's like yoga. I'm on my mat. I'm just focusing on me, and I just want to do the best that I can do. And so you tend to find more of the owl eagles, whereas the parrots and doves tend to be in more group-oriented sports and activities, because they like to be interacting with others. Whereas in the martial arts, maybe you have one partner, and that's what owls like. That I'm good one-on-one, but I don't need to be doing something with everybody simultaneously. So it is very interesting. Some of the greatest fighters have been owls, not the eagles, because they spend so much time perfecting their form.
That is interesting, because I would always assume that the fighter would be an eagle, because they just are imposing.
We make interesting assumptions like that, but you look at somebody like Muhammad Ali, one of the greatest fighters in history, and he was like a parrot dove. He was very funny. He had charisma, but people talked about him as just being one of the most caring, compassionate people you'd ever meet. Joe Foreman, I mean, he's another great boxer, such a dove. I mean, he would turn on the eagle in the ring, but then he really was a dove. We often make assumptions about roles, like comedians. Jerry Seinfeld is an owl. You might think all comedians are parrots. That's not true at all. A lot of comedians are owls. Somebody like George Carlin, he would have these great lines that were like analyzing the world around him. Like at one time he said, everyone driving slower than me is an idiot. Everyone driving faster than me is a maniac. And he would just make these observations. Like, that's so true. It's so logical. And that's what owl humor is. It's so logical. Jerry Seinfeld would dissect the world around him. And so sometimes we assume certain jobs will draw certain styles, like comedians have to be parrots. That's not true at all. Fighters have to be eagles. That's not true either. So sometimes the most successful people in those roles are the most surprising personalities, because they just did something different that people weren't expecting.
Is there a cautionary tale for future presidential candidates?
I think so. After writing the book, and working my way back, election by election, 22 of them in a row, all the way back to 1932. I think the cautionary tale is that you can't just display one style, that you're going to have to be the chameleon, that you can't impose your style on others. And an example of that is you take somebody like a Ronald Reagan. Reagan was just a master communicator. He was called the great communicator. And why was he so good? He was so good because he had this ability to flex to every style. He could be funny, he shared statistics, he could be compassionate, he could stand there and say, tear down this wall when he's standing in Berlin, and just be more eagle. And when you have flexibility, you appeal to everyone. And I think the cautionary tale is for presidential candidates, for CEOs, for managers, for spouses, is don't impose your personality on the people around you. Know yourself, understand the people you're talking to, and flex to their style. Communicate to them in their style, and you can connect with anybody. And I think if presidential candidates know that, it would change the outcome of elections. If spouses knew that, it would change how marriages work. That we just have to understand each other and treat people the way they need to be treated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So before I let you go, do you have a favorite personality type yourself?
Well, it must be my parent. No, I'm kidding. No, the beauty of all these is I love the fact that every single one of these styles has something incredibly powerful to offer. I think of it's like each style has a superpower. And I think that's maybe the biggest thing that I learned just over the years is to appreciate and value every single one of these styles, that they all bring something amazing. And when we let go of judgment and we replace it with acceptance, we get rid of all that drama, and you realize that they're all good.
You seem to be a very positive person. I mean, I've had this smile on my face since I started off this podcast.
That's my parrots. That's this guy coming out.
Yeah,
hey, look, if there's any topic that is infinitely interesting, it's ourselves. And I think that's when we take some time to really think about ourselves and think about how we're impacting the people in our lives. And that, when I wrote Personality Wins, I really thought about that I hope this gets people to look at themselves, not just the president, but look inside and see how they're impacting the people around them. And then that would really make a difference for people. So I hope when people read it, I hope people do take a moment to think about their own personality, not just the candidates.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for someone who wants to take the personality test which you offer, where can they find it?
Yeah, if they go to takeflightlearning.com, and you can purchase assessments there, and you can figure out, all right, what is your style? Who are you?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Merrick, for coming on. I really appreciate it again.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Kane.
No worries. I hope to see you soon, and all the best. And I'm going to plug in your book and all of your website and all of your information down in the description for the video. And I'm going to let you go right now. Thanks again.
Thanks.
It's been an honor having you on. Really, it is.
Oh, my pleasure. I hope you had some fun. Yeah, that was a lot of fun chatting. So hopefully you got some new perspectives along the way too. I always hope that's
absolutely. I never actually thought of personality types like this. So when I started off this, when I first reached out to you, I said, let me go in completely unawares and see what comes out of it from this personality thing, because it's really enlightened me. It really has. I never thought of personalities the way you have thought about them, really. I always thought about someone being, okay, that person's aggressive. This one is not assertive. This person is compassionate. This person is caring. But you never actually managed to group it in together. But now that you're telling me these things, I'm going to view the world all that differently. So thank you for that.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I appreciate that. That's the goal.
Yeah. All right.
So awesome. Once you get it up there, tell me, and I'll push it out to my social media as well.
Perfect. Thanks a ton. All right.
Awesome. Have a great night.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.